In today's video, I have a conversation with Grammy Award-winning producer Ryan Truesdell. Ryan Truesdell was kind enough to produce my brand new recording, Legacy, a centennial celebration of J.J. Johnson, and I'm extremely excited to share this conversation where we talked all things J.J. Johnson, J.J. as a composer, J.J. as an arranger, J.J. as a trombonist, J.J. as a jazz musician and an important, influential figure in the music, and his contributions specifically as a composer in the world of third stream music and kind of the development of people like Gil Evans and Miles Davis and how he played a role in all of that part of the history of jazz music. So in this wide-ranging conversation, we cover a variety of topics, and I hope you'll enjoy the conversation. I know I did. I hope you'll be able to check out my new project, Legacy, on streaming platforms. I hope you'll join me in celebrating J.J. Johnson all year long in 2024 and beyond as one of the seminal figures of jazz and trombone. So enjoy the conversation. All right, so why don't you start off by introducing yourself and telling everyone about your role in the J.J. Johnson Legacy project.
Sure. My name is Ryan Truesdell. I was asked by Nick to produce this recording, uh, and I think that's the end of my introduction. Uh, no, it was. I've been there the whole process through the beginning, as Nick well knows, from the very beginning when it was a concept until the recording and post production. And
I know primarily in your life, you're producer, composer, arranger, band leader. What do you think about when you think about JJ and in those roles as a composer, as a producer, as a player, kind of on that large scale?
I mean, I think he definitely is in the top. I don't even know what you say, but he's definitely considered in the top 10, 20 composers that one would think of as a large ensemble composer, um, or arranger. Um, the thing for me with JJ was, if you're a musician and you've done any amount of listening research through your development, you absolutely have encountered JJ. I've been trying to think ever since you asked me to do this interview, which, like my first encounter with JJ and his music or something, and I can't necessarily pinpoint it exactly for sure, but I do know that I've encountered him in like a dozen different capacities through my own education and development, and I think that says a lot for him as a composer and a player. Um, that he is in so many different circles and surfaces in different fashions as an ensemble player, as a solo, like a quartet player. He's got his duos, he's got his, uh, the quintet, the sextet, small group things. He's got the medium-sized band things. He's got the giant brass orchestras. He's just kind of got it all. So, um, and then obviously the one that I'm not saying, which is the fact that he was basically credited with teaching the instrument how to approach bebop language, which is, if that was the only thing he did, he could he should be in the record books or the history books for that. But yeah, he contributed a lot, I think, compositionally. More you probably know more of his like small group tunes than I'm aware of.
Sure.
He's got, every time I come across, do you know that Mosaic box set
Hmm.
of like this complete small group recordings or whatever? Every
Yeah.
once in a while I'll come back to that and I'll just forget like all these tunes that I've never known that are his from that like small group era.
Yeah, there's a lot, and they don't get played very often, but well, some of them don't get played very often. Some of them get played very often. But I'm always curious about how other people encounter JJ's music because as a trombone player, it's kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, it's force fed to you when you're starting off. Like, who do you listen to? JJ as a
Yeah.
player. So then so from my point of view, I always encounter his music first as trombone first, and then like the compositions or the arrangements. But I was just curious.
Yeah, I was gonna say I definitely came the opposite.
Right.
Like I definitely came at him. I I mean, I probably knew him as a player just from like the stuff he did with Miles, the stuff that he did like with Sonny Rollins and Clifford Brown and those kind of things. But um, I think the first time that it really registered with me was what's the name of that record? Music for Brass.
Hmm.
The like the holy grail of third stream music, and I think his tune was the second one on the record, called "Poem for Brass," which you and I have talked a lot about. But I think that was the first time I heard it, and I was like pinged as like, who wrote this? And I was like, oh, it's that trombone player guy that I've been seeing so much. Uh, but yeah, I think it was that.
It's really interesting to me that that's how you would come across it, because like that's some of the last JJ Johnson stuff that I ever found out about was like
Mm,
the third stream stuff and all the brass orchestra stuff, just because trombone first, going for those small
well,
group records. But
if it was reversed, then this interview would be reversed, and I would
well,
be
yeah.
talking about trombone things, and you would be talking about composition. But yeah, no. And then I think I just because of my like thirst for finding out about as many composers and arrangers that I could, I came to like what was that? It's been reissued a couple times, but I think it was called just JJ, that like big band record.
The big band record, yeah.
But I will say that as I've been thinking about this through your project and or through your recording and just preparing for this, that I don't know if there's anyone that kind of took the brass orchestra and ran with it quite like JJ did. I don't know if it was his idea for that instrumentation for that record or not. I have a feeling it was John Lewis's,
Oh,
but uh, John, because John wrote a piece for brass, JJ did Jimmy Jufrey, and then did Gunther write another one? I can't remember. There was that
yeah, that
when they
record.
reissued the CD, they put two albums together, and the Poem for
Oh,
Brass stuff got mixed up. But
yeah,
I think there was four pieces that were done for brass orchestra: John Lewis, JJ, Jimmy Jufrey, and I think it was Gunther. Um, but as far as I know, that never really took off with anyone other than JJ.
right,
Because then he went, when was that? 56, that Music for Brass was. And then he did the Perceptions record for Dizzy Gillespie in
right.
60 or 61, something like that. And that was the brass orchestra. And then later in his life, he came back and redid and wrote new things for that brass orchestra. And I've always been really fascinated by that instrumentation. I think it's really interesting that because there's no rhythm section, it's very kind of third stream classical focus, but
Right.
to an extreme of like large ensemble jazz only with four euphoniums
Right.
and two harps and six trumpets and something insane.
But it's interesting to think about the trajectory of it all, because like the Perceptions record is early 60s. Those two big band records were the late 60s. And then there's like
Oh,
nothing. Like the Perceptions actually happened first before those big band records.
oh, interesting.
I didn't find that out till just the other day. I was looking up the dates and I was like, oh, that's weird. But so he did the Poem for Brass and the Perceptions before he did the big band records.
Oh, interesting. I guess I always thought the big band records were in the 50s, but um,
No, they came about because RCA was trying to steal them from Columbia, and they wanted to do something different that he hadn't done, and he had never done a big band record, so they had him do a big
oh,
band record, and so he did
oh,
too.
interesting.
Because he had just done like it said like he had done like almost 10 years with Kay Winding, just the quintet doing that
Yeah,
stuff.
it's not. I mean, as you and I have discussed, the brass orchestra stuff is huge instrumentation, and it's not. I'm sure the record label was like, "Yeah, we're not going to pay for that."
Something's never
um,
changed.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Oh, interesting. Oh, I never knew that. Well, and that was so that must have been like right before, Because didn't he go to California and did like film scoring and stuff for a period, like in the
In the
70s?
70s. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then in the 70s they did that, and then in the 80s they convinced him to come back and play again, and then he did the brass orchestra thing, and then he also did. I'm not 100% sure, but there's that Robert Farnham record that has
Oh,
Malaga on it.
the string, the orchestra, the full
Yeah, the
orchestra thing.
orchestra. I don't know what of that is his or not because it's kind of a huge project with
I
a lot of personnel, so I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I think I always was under the impression that Robert did all the charts
Okay,
for that.
and it's
Maybe
just
I'm wrong, I don't know, but
yeah, I'm not sure.
that's such an amazing scope though. Like I'm trying to think of other beyond like, the full-time writers like Gil and Bill Holman and that kind of crew. Like I don't know too many people that had such a variety of work as a composer, but yet also retained a very heavy playing, thing. Like he was writing and playing in small groups, large ensembles, everything, film scoring, and I mean that's pretty incredible to
Yeah,
think about. But
it's pretty crazy, and I think it's lesser talked about. I think his compositional output and all those records from the end of his life are not really talked about either too much as compared to the 50s and 60s. The but that's why I wanted to ask you about him because it's like all of that music that he wrote that's like in that third stream thing, and then for brass orchestra and all that film scoring stuff. Like I just don't know if it's widely known or not amongst composers, arrangers, and stuff like that.
um, I don't know that they. I don't know how to answer that really because I mean I'm familiar with it through like my just kind of upbringing in
Right.
the world. My one of my main composition teachers was a trombonist, so I mean it was not far removed in my life. And I do think that the third stream record, Music for Brass, I think is very well known within composers.
Hmm.
Um, but like I don't think people realize the connection and the importance that that album actually has in recorded music, in
Mm.
jazz history. Um, so when they did Music for Brass, that was a trial run for Columbia, essentially to try out a large ensemble featuring Miles Davis. And
Oh.
John Lewis wrote that piece with Miles on it, and
Hmm.
JJ plays on it as solo parts. And I don't think Miles did Miles play on Poem for Brass? I think there's another trumpet solo on it. I think Miles
Yeah.
is just on John
But
Lewis's tune.
yeah, I think there's a part, but it's not Miles.
Yeah, I think it's somebody else. But anyway, that record was what convinced them, Columbia, to come to Miles and say, "Hey, we should do a large ensemble with you, featuring you," and that's how Miles Ahead came about.
Hmm.
And he was given two options of writers, and it was Gunther and Gil Evans, and he picked Gil. Um, for the Miles did, and but that record was what kind of brought the large ensemble featuring soloist thing that became of Miles Ahead, Porgy and Bess, Sketches of Spain. That all came out of that record. So to think that that record didn't exist and that kind of large brass orchestra featuring someone
Yeah.
uh, didn't exist, like none of those records with Miles, you know, I would argue that I don't even know that the relationship between Miles and Gil would have continued post Birth of the Cool had that not really come about. Um,
Yeah, that's crazy to think about all
yeah, so
those
I
things.
always find that really fascinating, and I mean the other record that's paired with it. This is I'm taking a tangent, but uh, is it has George Russell's All About Rosie on it, and
Hmm.
that has this big stop time solo for Bill Evans that's like
Hmm.
really famous and that kind of was like, again, that was early 50s, so it was like pre Miles Davis sextet, and that kind of like that solo was like one of his first very kind of famous ones. And yeah, it's I love that record. I come back to it pretty often, but I don't know. I'm a giant nerd, so I
Well,
don't know if
same,
others follow that,
same.
follow suit. But
Um,
yes, all of you that are watching this little interview, if you have not checked out that record, you it is required listening for Nick and Ryan's podcast thing that we're doing here.
this is also a tangent, but did Bob ever talk about JJ or his music or anything like that?
A little bit, but I don't know that he ever talked about. I'm trying to think if he talked about his music. I do remember him talking about him as a writer and uh, respecting him
Hmm,
as a writer, but I also remember Bob talking about him just kind of as a friend and an acquaintance that
hmm,
that they were always doing things together and their paths would always often cross. And
sure.
um, that as as you know with Bob, you usually would hear more negative things than positive things. So if you don't,
Right.
no news is good news in this scenario. But I do remember him talking about him, and what brought it back to me was at the session when Rufus called him Jay,
Hmm.
because Bob called him like would refer to him as Jay too, and that's what made me, because I was like, oh yeah, I've heard him referred to that before, and that was through Bob.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I feel like anyone that's around that age that knew him calls him Jay, and all of
Yeah,
us, students of him are more like JJ, JJ.
yeah,
But at some point they changed the spelling too, because you go to the early records and it was Jay, Jay,
yeah.
and then they changed
But
it
I
to
think that was, I wonder if that was much him as it was just record labels thing. Because I mean, I guess the same was like for Brookmeyer, like until the late 50s almost, he was always Bobby. And so
oh
like all the records were Bobby Brookmeyer. And if I come across people that are in their 70s and 80s now, they know him as Bobby Brookmeyer. Um, and so it was always Bobby played with, Bobby playing with Mulligan, and
right.
I think his first record, the Bob Brookmeyer, or it's called the Vic record. Vic Records put it out, and it's got Bob, and he's got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. It's like his first kind of like big band record
Hmm.
under his name, and it was
Oh,
like a
okay.
12-piece band and had Old Jane Snavely on it and a couple other tunes. But I think the title of that record is just called Bobby Brookmeyer. I never called him Bobby. That was just
That would
such
be
a
a little
weird
odd.
thing for me.
Yeah. Kind of changing gears to the session, and you mentioned Rufus. So what was the kind of the experience like of kind of trying to guide me and the band through that music and that session to kind of pay tribute to JJ?
I don't know that I did much guidance, but I mean the session as itself was just really, I mean, it was an exciting experience to be a part of, but also incredibly easy in terms of producerial kind of roles, because I think you would remember this more than I would. I think we had like 8 hours booked or something, and
Mhm.
by like 3.5 hours in, we were like, okay, we've got a record. Uh, so like it happened very quickly, and we were in that space in Rudy Van Gelder's studio out in New Jersey, and which is my first time working there, and it was really amazing to just be in that historic space. Um, I'm sure it was much more daunting for you because where you were positioned in the room, there wasn't it two just JJ records like staring you in the face on the
Yeah, because they
wall,
have
or
the
maybe it
whole,
was just the
yeah.
one. Yeah,
It
but it just had
was,
this whole one, and you're like, JJ's on that. That's JJ's record. That's Jay's record. um, so yeah, to be in that space, and then I think we looked at some pictures, and it was like JJ in that recording studio, um, and then also the adjacent records, Love Supreme, and I'm a giant nerd for the Bill Evans orchestra record that Klaus Ogerman did, and that was done in that space, and we saw pictures from that, and um, yeah, so it was really special. And the musicians, obviously, like you cannot go wrong with Rini and Rufus and Lewis and yourself, and everyone was obviously having a good time, and your arrangements were all clear and concise, and so I just was like, okay, here's another one, and then I'd write a few notes, and then it was like it was over. So it was a really fun time. I'm sure you were probably more stressed than I was about it,
I think so. I think that's accurate.
but
I I
holding
was
on for dear
reasonably
life.
stressed about it, reasonably or unreasonably.
I have to use my ears and my brain and make sure that everything goes like smoothly and everyone's in a good mood and that the environment is set for the best music making we can do. You have like the physicality of like arms and face, and then also being a leader and being like, that one wasn't good or this didn't happen, and balancing all the musicians' thoughts and input. And so you had a lot of weight on your shoulders, and
For me, also dealing with the intergenerational respect tree. I don't know. Like, what
that's
can you
good.
say?
That's a
What
good way
can't
of
you
putting it.
say?
Yeah. But I don't know how you feel, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like I have found dealing with all of that kind of generation of musicians that, you definitely do show respect, obviously, for where they've been and what they've done. But on the other hand, they're just, I always am like, oh yeah, they're just people. They're just peers. And like Rufus is absolutely a piece of my heart. I love him so much. And I mean, I love all three of them, but like I've known Rufus for a really long time. He's just such a teddy bear. And then I'm like sitting there just chatting with him and realizing, oh, you played with Joe Henderson and you played with JJ and you played on the Thad Jones Mel Lewis band and you played with these people and blah 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 blah. It just keeps going, and he'll start telling stories of singers or musicians and people that he played with, and it's just like, oh Jesus, okay, you're kind of a big deal. And that's the same thing with Lewis, like whenever I've been on the road with Lewis, we'll sit down and I'll just be like, oh God, he's played with
Everyone.
everybody. And Rainey too. We've lost a lot of like really great historic jazz musicians recently, and I always see Rainey posting some picture of being like on tour with them, and I'm just like, Jesus Christ, she's been on tour with everybody.
You played with everybody.
Um, yeah. So I mean, like, I think it's a testament to you that that they all wanted to play with you, and a testament to Jay, if I may be so bold to call him Jay, JJ's music, and that they trusted you with it, and they were all impressed. I know they were. They said it to me, and I think they said it to you too. But just that they were all very happy with how it came out, and I think that's a huge testament to you and to the project and to Jay's music.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being a part. You made my life a little
Of
easier to
course.
have someone to lean on.
Well, not that we need to use this platform to convince everyone that producers are valuable tools in the studio, but uh, I I mean, actually, that's a good question for you. Like, I've produced, I can't remember how many of your records now, three, four,
Several.
something like that. And, you know, I think you're one of the few people that are always, that you realize the value of having that kind of second pair of ears um, in the studio. And I know that you've done production for other people's records too. So, I mean, how does that feel to have a producer there as like a band leader yet player, like you have two hats that you have to wear, three if you count the composer arranger thing, but
Yeah. For me, I just realized that I can't do all of them to my best ability at the same time, you know? So it's just like you can deal with the arranging beforehand, but the playing and like actually, did we get that? Did we not get it? I'm like, if I can be totally detached from it, I play better, I think. And I just, after doing it, having had you do one, and then I did in one where you weren't there, and I was like, oh, it was much better when Ryan was here. For just from
Yeah,
my
no,
mental clarity.
no matter how good, I think all the musicians are like that. Rufus has been on 1,000 records or something insane, but I think that he's still, playing an instrument is physical and mental, and
Yeah,
it just takes so much effort and mental capacity to do that. That if you had to be listening to everyone and make sure that everyone played the right notes and played in tune and were together and did
yeah,
everything correctly, you would not have the space in your brain to be able to play. I don't think.
yeah, pretty much not. I mean, you can do it obviously, but it's like having been doing so much teaching for so long now, it's like it's all the problems are extremely obvious when you're outside of the situation. But
Yeah,
when you're doing it, you can't tell. And so I'm just like, I've realized like, oh, I need this is something that I need in order for the project to come across as best as it
yeah.
can. So
Well, and it's true because you, like you said, you could do it without, but it usually means that you like do a take, you stop, you go into the booth, you listen to it.
yeah,
Did we actually do it? It's just like there's a lot of time wasted by doing that. So,
yeah.
well, that's
Is there
too
anything
bad.
else you want to add about Jay or the project or anything?
I think it's really great that you're doing this. I think that, I mean, you and I have talked a lot about this on the side, but, you know, I find that JJ's music is a very important thing, like in terms of having compositional and academic kind of importance in the history of jazz and the history of jazz writing. And I think there's a lot of writers that are in the similar boat, with JJ, that can very easily get overlooked in this world of, I'm going to sound like an old man now, but like in this world of just like very fast paced, and there's so much new music coming out, and it's much easier to listen to, from like a beginning trombonist, you know, to probably find and come across, Ryan Keberly or Steve Turre before that they would come. Like if you're just doing linearly backwards, you're going to hit those guys before you hit JJ and Slide Hampton and Bob and all of that kind of stuff. So um, I think it's the important thing that you're doing is bringing his name back into the limelight to make people recognize him again. And the other thing that I think is very important is just to have his music being performed. In the nice thing that we said earlier in the our talk is that he's written music for a variety of ensembles, but as you and I have tried, it's not readily available for performance, and you kind of have to hunt and peck and try to dig it out of whatever closet it's buried in somewhere, or library archive or wherever. So um, I applaud you for taking upon the you know the control of creating something that is going to bring his legacy uh, to people. And there will, and this is speaking for me that did something for Gil on his 100th birthday. Like, you are going to have people come up to you that'll be like, oh, I never knew of this JJ Johnson, but I really like his music. And then all of a sudden you've introduced someone to this world of Jay, and by that, you know by those kind of connections, you build and you keep his name and his music alive, which I think is ultimately the most important thing. So I I applaud you for doing this. To take that on in honor of JJ's legacy is really important, and I think people are going to really love the record. I really love the record. I'm very proud of it, even though I didn't have to do any of this. Uh, but yeah, no, congratulations. It's a great project, and I hope a lot of people explore not only the music that you put on this record, but all of the other JJ music that's out there, and